My mom ambushed me with lawyers after inherited $2 million. She wasn't ready for what I brought with me. Hello, Reddit. I'm Amber, I'm 29, and I want to tell you about the man who shaped everything I am, my Grandpa Harold. And the mess that followed when he passed, mostly thanks to my mother, Patricia, who saw him as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. Growing up, Grandpa Harold was everything to me. He wasn't just my grandfather, he was my mentor, my protector, my anchor. He built a chain of home appliance stores starting from a single shop he opened in his 20s with a loan and a dream. He was completely self-taught, no business degree, just a stubborn work ethic, brutal honesty, and an eye for opportunity. And even though my mom was his only child, they were never close. She always had this air of entitlement about her, like she was owed his success just for existing. From a very young age, Grandpa took me under his wing. I remember being 6 years old, sitting behind the counter in one of his stores while he showed me how to count change manually, saying calculators make you lazy. When I got older, he'd take me along to meetings, explain what markups were, how inventory cycles worked, how to spot when someone's trying to BS you in a negotiation. He never treated me like a kid. He treated me like his protege. Every summer through high school, I worked at one of his stores, not for show, either. I was stacking boxes, running floor sales, handling customer complaints. I didn't get special treatment. My mom, meanwhile, spent those same years drifting between failed investment ventures, spa days, and debt. Always debt. Fancy handbags, last-minute vacations to places like Aruba or the Maldives, and somehow always needing money to tide her over. She'd call Grandpa up with some teary story about needing help, and he'd give in, even if it meant dipping into accounts he swore he'd never touch. And the second she got the wire, she'd be posting photos of herself sipping cocktails on some yacht. #blessed. What stung the most wasn't the money. It was how she talked about him. Behind his back, she'd call him the old man, and joke about when he'd finally kick it so she could get her hands on what she believed was hers. She never saw the legacy, just the estate. Grandpa wasn't stupid. He saw it too. But for some reason, maybe guilt, maybe just stubborn love, he kept bailing her out. Still, he'd say to me, over and over, "Don't worry, kiddo. You'll be taken care of. I've got plans." He never liked drama, though. He didn't talk specifics, but he was always clear that he wanted me to carry on the business. He used to say, "You've got the stomach for it. Your mom never did." I never asked about the will, never pushed. I trusted him. Then, last winter, he passed away. A stroke. Quick, quiet. Just like him. I was devastated. I still am. The man who gave me everything, who made me who I am, gone. The funeral was a blur. My mom was sobbing like a widow, all crocodile tears, draped in black like some old Hollywood starlet, and accepting condolences like she was royalty. I barely made it through my eulogy. A few weeks later, the lawyer called. He wanted to meet regarding the estate. I figured that was it. This was when Grandpa's promise would come through. That all the lessons, all the years, all the "you'll be taken care of" talk would mean something tangible. I didn't expect everything, but I thought maybe a share of the stores. Something real. Instead, I walked into that office and got blindsided. Patricia had inherited everything. Not just the money, the stores, the property, the shares, the house, the trust, everything. There was a small clause in the will. A one-time gift. To me. $25,000. That was it. The lawyer, this skinny guy named Carl who looked like he got bullied in middle school and never quite recovered, handed me an envelope like it was some generous token. "Your grandfather cared deeply for you," he said with this sympathetic face that made me want to scream. 25 grand. That was all his care was worth, apparently. I couldn't believe it. I sat there frozen while my mom smiled that smug little smile she always wore when she won something she didn't earn. "That's generous," she said. "I told you he had a soft spot for you." I wanted to ask Carl what happened. Where the hell was the business succession plan? Where were the things he promised me? Carl just kept saying, it was Mr. Harold's will. It was very clear. And I couldn't do anything. No one could. It was legally airtight. My mom didn't waste time. Within weeks, she was selling off parts of the chain, modernizing the business, firing people who'd worked for Grandpa for decades. She turned his legacy into a garage sale, all while living it up in that house like she'd built it brick by brick. Meanwhile, I was left with 25 grand and a dozen lessons about business that suddenly felt like echoes from a man I wasn't sure I knew at all. I don't know why he changed his mind. Maybe he didn't. Maybe Patricia got to him before the end. Maybe she played on his emotions, convinced him I'd be fine, that I didn't need anything. Maybe he was tired, or scared, or just old. But I can't help feeling betrayed. Not by the money, not even by the loss of the business. By the silence. By the fact that he never told me. That he let me believe I was the one. The heir. The future. And now I'm just a footnote in a legacy that's already being erased. 2 weeks after the funeral, we all gathered at the lawyer's office, and I was still in that foggy, disoriented state where the world felt half real. It was a cold Tuesday morning, the kind where the air feels like it's biting through your clothes, and I remember sitting in that stiff leather chair thinking I'd give anything just to talk to Grandpa one more time. I didn't expect fireworks. I thought maybe there'd be some surprise savings account, or maybe a letter he wrote to me. Something small and sentimental. My mom showed up in full black again, like she was still playing the grieving daughter even though her mascara barely held up for 5 minutes at the actual funeral. My Uncle Martin came too, not for any emotional reason, but because he'd always been circling Harold's money like a shark with a nose for blood. Aunt Lynn brought her husband, who kept yawning like he was late for golf. I could feel them all glancing at me every so often, and I kept my eyes on the floor. Carl, the lawyer, stood behind his giant oak desk and opened a manila envelope like he was unsealing a sacred artifact. He cleared his throat and began reading the will. It started normal, a few lines about Grandpa's devotion to family, about his career and legacy, and then he dropped the bomb. To my granddaughter Amber, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all business assets, bank accounts, properties, and holdings, totaling approximately $2 million. That room went dead silent for about 2 seconds, and then everything erupted. Patricia shot out of her seat like someone had lit her chair on fire. "This is a joke," she screamed, her voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since I was 12. He must have been confused. This is not what he wanted. Carl kept reading, ignoring the chaos, like he'd expected this and was just trying to power through. But my mom wasn't having it. She manipulated him, she hissed, pointing at me with a shaking hand. She turned him against his own daughter. He was old and vulnerable, and she took advantage. This isn't fair. This isn't right. Everyone just stared at her, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to rip the will out of Carl's hands. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was still trying to understand what had just been said. $2 million. Me. Everything. Carl wrapped up the reading with a few notes about logistics, the titles, the bank transitions, the executor details, and then he said, "Mr. Harold made his intentions extremely clear. There is no ambiguity here. This was his final will, updated and notarized 6 months before his passing." When it ended, my mother stormed out without another word. The others followed her like a pack of stunned dogs, mumbling half-hearted congratulations to me that sounded more like thinly veiled threats. I just sat there until everyone was gone, my hands clenched so tight I could feel the crescent-shaped marks my nails had dug into my palms. That same evening, the call started. First it was Patricia, calm and syrupy at first, trying to act like nothing had happened. "Amber, honey, let's talk. I'm sure this was just some misunderstanding. Your grandfather was getting forgetful, and we need to think about what's best for the family." I didn't answer. I just let it go to voicemail. Then came the guilt. "Do you really think Grandpa would want you to keep everything for yourself? He believed in unity. He built this for all of us. You wouldn't even have what you have if not for me. I raised you. I brought you into this world." I stopped listening after that one. When I didn't respond, she escalated. Suddenly I was selfish. A snake. A gold digger. She sent long, ranting texts at 2 in the morning, full of phrases like "betraying your blood" and "this family won't survive this greed." Then the rest of the family got involved. Uncle Martin left a voicemail saying he always thought I was better than this. Aunt Lynn wrote an actual letter, like printed and stamped it, talking about how disappointed Grandpa would be if he saw how divisive I was being. Even my cousin Emily, who I hadn't seen since high school, messaged me asking how I could be so heartless to my own mother. It didn't stop there. They tried staging what they called a family intervention, which was basically a group ambush over dinner where they all cornered me and started listing reasons why it was my duty to redistribute the estate. Martin kept using the word share like he was some spiritual guru, saying things like, "We're all in this together, Amber. You're not an island. Harold was the glue, and now you have to be the bridge." I nearly choked on my wine. Patricia sat across from me, arms folded, staring at me like she was waiting for a confession. "You know what I've been through. I sacrificed my life for this family, and you're going to hoard everything like some kind of robber baron. I didn't ask for any of this," I said, "but I'm not giving it up because you feel entitled to something you didn't earn." She stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "You're just like your father," she spat, like it was the worst insult in the world, then stormed out again. For weeks, it was like I had a target on my back. Old family friends started backing away. I'd run into people at the grocery store who'd suddenly heard a different version of Grandpa's will. My mom even tried to convince a local journalist to run a piece about Harold's questionable last-minute changes, though it never went to print. But the damage was done. I couldn't walk around town without someone giving me side-eye, like I'd robbed a church. Meanwhile, the businesses were in freefall because none of the managers knew what the hell was going on and customers were pulling away from all the drama. I had to step in fast, reorganize the leadership, stabilize the finances, and I spent more time in Harold's old office than I did in my own home. I found a folder in his desk marked for Amber that had notes on everything: his plans for me to take over, step-by-step instructions, business philosophies, even warnings about Patricia. It didn't make me feel better. It just made everything heavier. I didn't ask for this war, but now I'm in it. And the worst part? Sometimes I wonder if they're right. Not about me manipulating him or stealing anything. That's all garbage, but about the family. About whether I broke it by accepting what he gave me, or if it was already broken, and this just pulled the curtain back. It started small, the way most nightmares do. A couple of text messages from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years, written in that performative kind of tone where they pretend to be concerned but are really just fishing for gossip. Hey Amber, I heard about what happened with the estate. Just want to say I hope you're making decisions that honor Grandpa's memory. Then came the less subtle ones. You should really think about what you're doing. Family means more than money. And that was just the first day. By the end of the week, my inbox was a dumpster fire. People from church, some of whom barely knew my name, were messaging me with Bible verses about greed and forgiveness like I had personally rewritten the will in blood. One woman even wrote, "Your poor mother is devastated. You're killing her, Amber." I hadn't seen this woman in person since I was a teenager, and she used to pass out paper programs during services. Now suddenly she had my number and was weighing in on family affairs like she had a front row seat. And that was just the texts. The calls were worse. At first, I tried answering, thinking maybe there was someone genuinely reaching out. But every time I picked up, it was either thinly veiled manipulation or full-on hysteria. My cousin Melissa sobbed through the phone, saying her kids would have to leave their school because they were expecting help from Grandpa's estate. Aunt Lynn said she was losing sleep at night worrying about the damage this greed is doing to your soul. One of my mom's friends called me at 10 at night just to scream, "Do you even care what you've done to your family?" before hanging up. I started turning off my phone when I went to bed. Then I stopped turning it back on. Eventually, I had to change my number altogether. But it didn't matter. They started emailing, messaging me through social media, demeaning me on LinkedIn like this was some kind of corporate betrayal. Patricia had clearly handed out my information like party favors, because even people I didn't recognize were chiming in. And when I finally locked down all my accounts, they went after my friends. My coworker Dana pulled me aside after lunch one day and asked if everything was okay at home. I nodded and said it was complicated. Then she showed me a message her sister had gotten from someone claiming to be a concerned family member, accusing me of manipulating a dying old man into changing his will. I laughed, but it didn't even sound like me anymore. It came out cracked and bitter, the kind of laugh people give right before they snap. Then came the smear campaign. I found out through a friend that my sister Jessica, who had been silent through all of this, just lurking in the background like she always did, was posting vague, loaded statements online. Some people think money makes them better than the people who raised them. Just wait until karma does its thing. The comments were a feeding frenzy of supportive church friends, former classmates, and family friends all patting her on the back like she was some tragic heroine. And Patricia? She took it even further. She started writing long Facebook posts painting herself as the betrayed matriarch. I raised my daughter to value family, but unfortunately the world teaches greed faster than I could teach love. She attached old photos of me and Grandpa, one she must have stolen from the house, and included little captions like "Before the lies." They were careful not to name me directly, but it wasn't subtle. It was like watching someone light a match in a dry forest and pretend it wasn't arson. And of course, the comments were full of sympathy. All these people fawning over her with crying face emojis and heart react spam, talking about how strong she was, how heartbreaking it must be, how they couldn't believe her daughter would take advantage of a dying man. I tried to report the posts. Social media did nothing. And then it crossed the line. One morning, I walked into work and found Patricia sitting in the lobby. She was wearing sunglasses indoors and holding a manila folder like she was about to deliver a legal deposition. When I saw her, my stomach dropped. She stood up immediately and walked toward me like she owned the place. I froze. All I could say was, "What are you doing here?" "I just want to talk," she said, smiling like she hadn't spent the last 3 weeks turning my life into a public crucifixion. "I'm at work," I said, already feeling the panic rising in my chest. "That's fine," she said. "This won't take long." She followed me all the way to the elevator, ignoring the looks from reception. I stepped in, hoping the doors would shut before she could follow. They didn't. Inside, she leaned in and hissed, "You know you don't deserve this. You're not a businesswoman. You don't know what the hell you're doing. I built your life. You think those church scholarships paid for themselves? I didn't answer. I just stared at the floor and tried to keep breathing. You're going to lose this job, she said, her voice going icy. And when you do, don't come crawling to me. I'll make sure nobody in this town hires you again. You think you're smart? You're not. You're scared. And everyone can see it. The doors opened. I walked straight to my desk and locked myself in the break room for 20 minutes until I stopped shaking. I told HR everything. They issued a warning against her, told me to contact security if she showed up again. But they couldn't do anything about the calls or the posts or the people showing up in my inbox calling me Judas. I started parking in a different lot. I asked a friend to walk me to my car. I got security cameras from my apartment. I stopped going out altogether. She hadn't just tried to ruin my reputation. She was trying to destroy my ability to function, to think clearly, to trust anyone. And the worst part was, it was working. The turning point came one night when I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, scrolling through a flood of notifications I couldn't even keep up with anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen. Someone had made a fake Instagram account using old photos of me and Harold, with captions like, "Bought her way into his heart." Another message came in while I was staring at the screen, just a single line. "You'll get what's coming to you." I didn't recognize the number. That was when Ethan finally said, "You need to talk to someone who knows how this works." I hadn't wanted to involve anyone else. It already felt like my whole life was being litigated in the court of public opinion, but he wouldn't let it go. He was calm but firm, and I could tell he was scared too, just better at hiding it. That night, he gave me the number of a woman named Samantha, a lawyer his co-worker had worked with during their family's estate nightmare. "She handles inheritance disputes," Ethan said. "And from what I've seen, yours is about to become one." I met Samantha 2 days later in her office, this quiet place tucked above a coffee shop that smelled like lemon polish and old legal books. She didn't waste time with small talk. She let me explain the situation, then leaned back and nodded like she'd seen it all before. And honestly, I think she had. "Here's what you're up against," she said. "You've inherited a substantial estate. Your mother and several other relatives clearly believe they should have been included. That makes them dangerous. If they haven't already filed, they will, most likely for undue influence or to contest Harold's mental capacity at the time of the will update." I asked her what that meant, and she didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll try to claim you manipulated him, that he wasn't in his right mind when he changed the will. They'll point to his age, any medical issues, even normal memory lapses. They'll try to paint you as a schemer who took advantage of a vulnerable man." My stomach dropped. It sounded absurd, but I knew she was right. Patricia had already been hinting at that exact narrative online. Samantha leaned forward, her voice lower. "If they do that, you need to be prepared. You need evidence. You need to start documenting everything." That night, I pulled out a spiral notebook and started transcribing voicemails. I screenshotted every text, every comment, every post I could find from Patricia, Jessica, anyone tangentially related. I made folders for each of them on my laptop. Every time I got a message, threatening or passive-aggressive or manipulative, I saved it. I stopped deleting anything. I downloaded apps to record phone calls. I set up cloud backups. I started keeping a journal, noting every time someone contacted me, showed up near my work, mentioned the inheritance in a message. I even started taking screenshots of my mom's public posts every morning, just in case she deleted them later. It felt like I was building a case just to prove I wasn't a thief. Ethan helped me install cameras. One at the front door, one in the hallway, one facing the back windows. We tested them together, made sure they recorded to an encrypted drive, and backed up to a secure cloud. I wasn't taking chances anymore. I even added motion-sensing lights outside. I didn't care that it made me feel paranoid. I already was paranoid. That wasn't a fear anymore. It was just reality. But the worst part, the part one couldn't admit out loud, was how much this whole thing had hollowed me out. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I couldn't focus at work. I started avoiding calls from friends who meant well, but didn't know what to say. I would flinch every time I heard the doorbell, convinced it was Patricia again. I hadn't slept a full night in weeks. One night, I broke down in the kitchen. I was trying to open a bottle of olive oil, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and suddenly I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Ethan just held me, didn't say anything, didn't try to fix it. He let me fall apart. And when I could finally talk, I said, "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to make him proud." "You did," he said. "And now you're doing what he would have wanted. You're fighting for it." I don't know if that's true. I don't know if Harold would have wanted this war, this ugliness, this loneliness that comes from watching your own bloodline try to burn your life down. But I do know this. He gave me something real, and I'm not letting them take it. Not because of the money, not even because of the business. Because for the first time in my life, I'm finally realizing who I am without them. And that's worth protecting. Patricia called it a family reconciliation. That was the phrase she used in her email, like she was some neutral party trying to mediate a minor dispute instead of the woman who'd spent the last month trying to publicly ruin my name and tear down everything Harold left behind. The email itself was worded so carefully it made my skin crawl. A good faith opportunity to resolve tensions, open dialogue, private and respectful conversation. She said she wanted to meet in person, just us, maybe with a few neutral third-party advisors, to keep things civil. She didn't mention who they were, just said they would be there to help clarify options. That alone was a red flag the size of a billboard. I wasn't stupid. I forwarded it to Samantha immediately. She read it, rolled her eyes, and said, "She's going to try to intimidate you. You don't go alone." So we didn't. The meeting was held in this sterile little conference room at a local hotel Patricia had picked. When I arrived with Samantha at my side, briefcase in hand and a copy of the will in my purse, I already knew what was waiting. Patricia sat at one end of the table in a bright cream blazer, like she thought dressing soft would soften what she was about to do. Next to her were two men in navy suits who didn't bother pretending they were there in peace. The moment I sat down, they introduced themselves as representatives of the concerned parties of the Harold Monroe estate, a fancy way of saying they were there to try and claw back what Patricia thought was hers by birthright. They didn't waste time. Within 10 minutes, they had a stack of papers in front of me, most of them dense with legalese. One of the lawyers, the thinner one with the round glasses and fake smile, said they were proposing a restructuring of the inheritance, a document that would allow me to voluntarily redistribute a majority of the assets to reflect a more balanced legacy and avoid lengthy and expensive litigation. He said it like he was offering me a favor, like the real threat wasn't in the paper but in the implication of what would happen if I didn't sign. The thicker lawyer, older, gray-haired, quiet but smug, added, "We're fully prepared to pursue a claim of undue influence, Amber. It's not personal, just legal responsibility on behalf of our client." Their client. My mother. I looked at Patricia and she didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just sat there with that calm, empty smile she'd been practicing in the mirror for decades. She didn't say a word, didn't need to. The message was clear: sign, or we'll destroy you. I took my time opening the leather folder in front of me, the one Samantha and I had spent the last 2 weeks building. Inside were printed screenshots of social media posts calling me manipulative, greedy, even abusive. Voice message transcripts where Patricia called Harold a senile old man and said she couldn't wait for this will crap to be over. Bank transaction logs showing that she'd been receiving regular payments from Grandpa for over 10 years, none of which she'd ever reported. And finally, the medical records Samantha had pulled from Harold's care facility, signed off by 2 attending physicians less than a month before the will was updated, both confirming that he was mentally competent, lucid, and capable of managing his affairs without assistance. I didn't say a word. I just laid it all on the table in one slow, deliberate motion. Then Samantha leaned in and said, "We're also prepared to file a defamation suit if these online statements continue. Prepared to notify the IRS about undeclared gifts. Prepared to counter any lawsuit with motions to dismiss and file for recovery of legal fees. Are you sure you want to proceed?" The thin lawyer's face went red almost immediately. He started flipping through the documents like maybe he could find a hole. The older one stayed quiet, but the smug look dropped right off his face. Patricia didn't move, didn't speak. Her expression shifted just slightly. Not fear, exactly. More like realization. Like she finally understood she wasn't dealing with a scared little girl anymore. I stood up. "You invited me here to trap me," I said. "You could have called. You could have talked like a mother. Instead, you brought 2 lawyers and a contract with a threat behind it. This isn't a family meeting. It's an ambush. And I came prepared." Samantha gathered the papers. We walked out without another word, and I didn't look back. On the drive home, I kept waiting for the adrenaline to crash, for the anxiety to creep back in, but it didn't. For the first time since Harold died, I felt something else entirely. Control. And I wasn't letting go of it again. I never wanted to go back to that house, but I knew it had to end where it started. Patricia called for another meeting, said it was time for truth and closure. After everything, after the lawyers, the threats, the online harassment, I didn't trust a word of it. But this time I wasn't coming just with legal backup or screenshots. This time, I had something they couldn't spin, couldn't distort, couldn't gaslight me into doubting. We met in the old dining room, the one Grandpa used to sit in with his ledger open and a cup of black coffee he never finished. The table still had the same scratch from when I dropped a box of inventory reports on it the summer I was 16. Everyone was there. Patricia, of course, dressed like she was attending a press conference. Jessica playing the role of hurt little sister in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. And then there was Craig, my mother's husband, leaning back in his chair like this was a poker game, and he had the winning hand. I brought the journal. Not a copy. The real one. Harold's black leather-bound journal that he kept tucked behind the bookshelf in his study. The one he never talked about and never showed anyone. I found it by accident, weeks after his death, when I was going through his things for the estate inventory. At first, I didn't even recognize the handwriting. It was shaky, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen from him. But once I started reading, I couldn't stop. Every page was a record, not just of his day-to-day, but of his fears, his observations, his frustrations. He wrote about Patricia's spending habits, the lies she told, the way she demanded money as if it were owed. He kept dates, amounts, names. There were entries about how she threatened to cut contact if he didn't keep the checks coming. One line stood out, and I underlined it when I read it the first time. Amber is the only one who ever asks me how I'm doing before she asks for something. Then I read the letter. I hadn't shown it to anyone yet. It was sealed, addressed to me, and tucked between the pages like he wanted me to find it, but not too soon. His handwriting was clearer there, more focused. He wrote that he knew Patricia would contest the will, that she would accuse me of coercion, that she would play the victim. He explained exactly why he changed everything, because I had earned it, because I respected what he built, not just for the money but for what it meant, because he trusted me to protect it. I laid both on the table, slowly, deliberately. I don't need you to believe me, I said, my voice low but steady. But you're going to hear what he wrote. I read sections aloud. I read his words about how he regretted giving Patricia so much over the years, how he saw what it turned her into, how he wished he'd told me sooner that the business was meant for me. I saw Patricia's face crack for the first time in weeks. Not completely, but enough. Her lips trembled. Her eyes flicked back and forth across the journal, like maybe she could unsee it if she just blinked fast enough. Jessica didn't say a word. She just stared at the journal like it was a bomb. Then Craig, of all people, tried to play it off. Well, he wasn't exactly thinking straight, was he? He was on blood thinners. That affects mood, memory, all sorts of things. I looked him straight in the eye. You mean like when you made a down payment on that lake house in Maine? The one you said you were going to pay for with your share of the inheritance? He froze. I watched the blood drain from his face. Patricia shot him a look that could kill. I pulled out the final card. Here's the thing, I said. You bragged about that at a dinner party 2 weeks before the will was read. You didn't know I was recording conversations in my house. But I've got the audio. You said, and I quote, "The old man's about to hand us a gold mine. I already put 10% down. The rest will come through when Pat gets her cut." Silence. Craig opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to Patricia and muttered, "You told me it was a sure thing." That was it. The whole performance fell apart right there. Jessica stood up and walked out without saying a word. Patricia sat frozen, staring down at the journal like she could will it to burst into flames. Craig just kept shaking his head, his face red, like he still couldn't believe the trap had closed around him. I didn't need to say anything else. I packed the journal back into my bag, folded the letter, and stood. "This is over," I said. And this time, no one argued. I didn't expect anyone to walk out with me that day, but Jason did. No drama, no speech, just stood up as I grabbed my folder, looked at Patricia, then followed me out of the room like he'd been waiting for a reason. I didn't say anything at first. We got into the elevator, and he just stood next to me, hands in his jacket pockets, head down like he was bracing for some invisible impact. I asked him, "You sure?" And he just nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I've had enough of the lies." Jason was always quieter than the rest of us, a little more private, more observant. Growing up, he was the one who sat in the corner of the room while Patricia made her grand speeches about loyalty and legacy, the one who disappeared into books while Jessica and I got dragged into fights we didn't start. I didn't realize how much of it he'd seen, how much he remembered, how much he'd swallowed, until we were sitting in a diner later that night, and he said, "She used to tell me you were just using Grandpa." I wanted to believe her. I think I did for a while. But then I remembered all the times you stayed with him at the shop, how he'd call you his partner when he thought no one else was listening. We sat there for a long time, eating pancakes that had gone cold. I told him he didn't owe me anything. He said he knew. That's why it meant something. A week later, Rachel called. I saw the number and almost didn't answer. I still had her texts saved, all the ones from the smear campaign. I'd seen the comments she left under Patricia's posts. I knew she'd taken sides, loudly, unapologetically. But something made me pick up anyway. "Amber," she said. Just that. My name, but soft, like she didn't expect me to answer. I didn't say anything. Then she said, "I was wrong. I got caught up in all of it. Your mom told us you manipulated him, that you isolated him." I believed her. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to hear it. I'm sorry." There was a long pause. I could hear her trying not to cry. It didn't feel performative. It felt real, messy, Late, imperfect, but real. We talked for almost an hour. She told me she didn't know about the journal, didn't know what Patricia had done behind the scenes. She said she'd been afraid to admit she was wrong because it meant accepting that she'd been part of something awful. I understood that more than I wanted to. I didn't forgive her in that moment, not completely, but I told her the door wasn't closed. That was enough. After the dust settled, I made decisions. Not out of guilt, not to smooth things over, but because I didn't want to be shaped by the same bitterness that broke my mother. I set up a trust for Jason's education. Nothing flashy, just enough to give him choices, something Harold would have wanted, a way to build without strings attached. He told me he wants to study architecture. I think he'll be good at it. For Patricia, I established a modest monthly stipend. I didn't tell anyone. No press release. No announcement. Just an automatic deposit with no name attached. It was less than what Harold gave her, and there were strict conditions. If she came after me again, in any way, it stopped immediately. I didn't do it for her. I did it so I could live with myself. But the most important thing I did was launch the Harold Monroe Foundation. It started small. Just a few thousand to fund young entrepreneurs who had ideas, but no backing. We hosted workshops in the old storefront he started with, renovated the back room into a community space. The first time I walked in after the remodel, I swear I could still smell the old pine cleaner he used to wipe down the counters. That space became something new, not an inheritance, not a weapon, but a beginning. I used what he gave me not to hold on to the past, but to build something that would outlive both of us. And that, I think, was the real legacy. Taking over the business didn't feel like a victory at first. It felt like walking into a room full of ghosts. Every corner of those stores held memories of Harold, from the way he used to whistle while inventorying the aisles to the scotch-taped motivational quotes on the back of the break room door. But slowly, step by step, Jason and I rebuilt it. Not just the shelves and supply chains, but the foundation itself. We gutted the outdated systems, partnered with suppliers using sustainable manufacturing, added a whole line of energy-efficient appliances, and expanded into recycled materials and reparable tech. Our mission became simple: sell what lasts, fix what breaks, and never forget where it all started. Jason was better at the design and logistics than I ever expected. He had this quiet, focused way of seeing the cracks in things before they formed, like he could anticipate problems a week before they happened. I let him lead more and more, and he never once used it to grandstand or compete. It just worked. We both wanted the same thing: to honor the work Harold put in by building something that wasn't just profitable, but principled. There was even a day, months after the worst of it passed, when Patricia called. Not to yell, not to manipulate, just to ask how we were doing. She sounded tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from work, but the kind that settles into your bones when you've spent too long believing you're owed something and finally realize you're not. We talked for 20 minutes. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't some dramatic reunion. It was awkward, a little stiff, but it was a beginning. I didn't invite her over. I didn't make promises. But I didn't hang up either. When I finally moved into Harold's house, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I expected grief, maybe guilt, some haunting sense of displacement. But it wasn't like that. It was peaceful. Still, like the house had been waiting to breathe again. I spent the first night in his old chair in the study, wrapped in one of his flannel throws, watching the late light fall through the window the way it used to when I was a kid sitting on the floor with my summer reading books. That's where I found it. Tucked in the back of his journal, one last page I hadn't noticed before. The handwriting was shakier than the others, almost like he'd written it late at night, maybe when he thought it might be his last entry. Just one line. True wealth is what you do with it. Make it matter. I stared at it for a long time, and I promised I would. Not just the business, not just the foundation or the building or the clean lines of our new eco-inventory. I promised to make all of it mean something. Not just for me, or for Harold, but for every kid like me who needed someone to believe in them without conditions. I promised to keep telling the truth, even when it was ugly. To build without stealing. To lead without taking. To give without letting myself be hollowed out. That's what he left me, and I intend to make it matter.